welcome to all of you who stayed for the afternoon session of the Festival of Ideas. So the trick of giving you lunch has had the positive thing you stuck around. Hopefully, we're going to have enough oomph in this session to keep you awake in the post-afternoon session. This afternoon is a continuation of our day on Our Future, Our North. Clearly, it's part of the Festival of Ideas events run by the University of York. And this one is in conjunction with the Darlington Economic Campus. And for those of you who are here this morning, you will have heard from Joe Crellin, Director General there. How many of you were in this morning's session? Great, fantastic. Because we had quite a lot of provocation, I think, in that first session, which I think this particular session has been designed to address. So some of the things that you heard this morning was about this potentially being a moment for York. Now, of course, it ain't just going to be a moment, because it's going to take maybe a little bit longer, but a moment in terms of it being a catalyst for York. And what are those things that are a catalyst for York? So this is billed as the tech trio. So to quote somebody else from this morning, this is the serious content underneath that brand and underneath that catalyst. So we're going to hear from some experts in the biotechnology area, in the creative technologies, and in the rail industry. And we're also going to hear directly about York Central, which is one of those things that we think makes this a moment for York and a catalyst. You also heard quite a bit about this tension about, are we only thinking about York, or are we thinking about the North, or are we thinking about the UK? Now, we're here today to look at things through the lens of York, because that's who we all are. But what I think you will also get is the sense that we must be part of something bigger, and talk about how that we can scale up what we do and how where we work across. I don't like calling them boundaries because they shouldn't be. And actually, from a university perspective, we don't tend to see those boundaries. So you're going to hear from everybody about how we are working with our neighbours, perhaps most visibly in the bio area. We now have a mayoral agreement with Tees Valley. We have the Bio-Industrial Cluster North. That's a much bigger region, and I'm sure we're going to hear similar things from other folk on the panel. So I'm going to hand over to the panel in just a moment, but just to introduce myself, I'm Sarah Thompson. I'm the Pro-Vice-Chancellor for Research at the University of York, hence this is really close to my heart. So a bit like last time, I'm just going to ask the panel very briefly to introduce themselves, and then each of them is going to give us their 5-minute perspectives. And just before I hand over, I just want to come back to one other thing we heard this morning, which was to really get this region off the ground, we need oomph. Well, this is what's on trial here. So my panel, their task is to demonstrate that we've got the oomph to really make this succeed. So, panel, if you'd just like to briefly introduce yourselves.
Okay, I'm not sure we signed up for quite what you just said, but we'll give it a good go. So I'm Abi Broadley. I am a consultant. I specialise in helping SMEs, so small businesses, get into rail. So I help them bring innovation into rail as well as business development strategy.
James?
I'm James Chong. I'm head of department of the biology department at the University of York, and I'm also the director of the Centre of Excellence for Anaerobic Digestion. I'll tell you a little bit more about that later.
I'm Helena Daffern. I'm a professor at the University of York in the School of Physics, Engineering and Technology, and I'm co-director of CoStar Live Lab, and I will explain what that is in a little while.
Hi, and I'm Edward Twiddy, and I'm one of the non-exec directors on the York Central project. I wear a few other hats. I co-founded a bank, which is called Atom, which is based in Newcastle. I chair a venture capital firm, which specialises in university spin-outs called Northstar. I'm convening the group that's hoping to produce a sewage-free future for Windermere, an engineering study over there, and I'm also on the board of His Majesty's Treasury.
And that won't be the last time you hear about sewage today, if I know anything about one of our speakers. So we're going to do Rail, Bio, CreaTech, and York Central in that order. I'm going to hand you over to Abi.
Okay. So hello, everybody. Like I say, I'm Abi Broadley. I run a small consultancy business that helps support innovators in rail and help them grow their businesses in rail. I started my rail career 16 years ago, and the student that went to the art college in York would be very surprised to see herself stood in front of you all talking about rail technology. But the rail industry is a wonderful industry to be part of. It is one where we connect communities across the nation, and one that 100% of the people, whether they catch a train or not, are positively impacted by rail, because rail freight's a real key part of it, and we move everything from waste to power ingredients for creating electricity, to your shopping for Tesco, to Highland Water. So we move lots of different things by rail. We also are a really good way of enabling social economic prosperity in the UK by connecting people to work and to the ability to grow their businesses. And what I thought I would reflect on in my few minutes this afternoon is the fact that York and North Yorkshire, but particularly York at the heart of it, have a really amazing opportunity to be a significant part and a louder voice than they currently have been, being part of the rail technology evolution that's happening. So I'm part of something called York, and York is the York Rail Innovation Community. So it's a rail cluster, a rail innovation cluster, that's been founded, I think, in 2019, before I joined it. And I'm a member of that, and my reflections are really personal reflections. But it's exciting because it is a combination of industry. So we've got industry leaders, as in the supply chain, so large companies such as Siemens and Hitachi, and then smaller businesses as well in the mix that are doing innovative things with digitalisation, software as a service. And we have people from Network Rail, who are the asset owners, and then we have people from the train operating companies, and the freight operating companies are all involved in York. And it's an opportunity to join informal meetings where we can discuss ideas, talk about challenges, hear what our clients, the asset owner Network Rail, have as problems, and we can help innovate and bring tech into, formalised in York and into the industry. We are at a moment in rail history, and I don't know who already might know this, but rail reform is happening right now. And in 2027, in the autumn of 2027, something called Great British Railways will come into existence. So the fact that we have a proactive innovation cluster, rail innovation cluster, is fantastic, because we can work alongside Great British Railways, GBR, and GBRX to bring all of our companies together and solve the problems in rail, the challenges that we have around how do we energise rail. You know, is it discontinuous electrification or is it something else? How do we utilise software as a service and the digital technologies? How do we improve lives for passengers and the movement of goods? The innovation cluster is set up as a triple helix, which until they started talking about this, I didn't know what it was. And it's essentially where academia and the asset owners and the local combined authority and the City of York Council and industry come together and work together to provide solutions for the future. So it's a very exciting moment to be in rail. Very pleased to be here, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you.
Hi everyone. Okay, so I guess I should tell you a little bit. I was an undergraduate at the University of Manchester, which seems relevant after the talk this morning. fled the south of England and haven't really looked back, so that's really nice. I'm talking to you today about biology and how York has been quite bashful about how good it is in biology, and that's why this is an important subject for us. So one of the main government funders for biology in the UK is the Biological and Biotechnology Research Council. About 5 years ago, York received a third of all the funding that went into industrial biotechnology in the UK. Quite recently, BBSRC had a scheme for prosperity partnerships where universities partner with companies. They awarded 8, York got 2. Okay, so 25% of all that funding, again, is coming to the University of York because we do absolutely world-class biology. So what does that mean for the economy? Obviously, biology touches a lot of places that are quite obvious, like crops, but it's also involved in the production of pharmaceuticals and vaccines and things like that. One of the great stats, 2 stats from York in terms of plant biology. One is if you eat ice cream, one of the molecules that's used to make ice cream nice and creamy rather than getting sort of big lumps of ice crystals in, comes from an antifreeze molecule that comes out of plants that was isolated in York. And the other thing is if you've ever had cough medicine, one of my colleagues developed a strain of poppy that produces 85% of the world's cough medicine. Okay, it's grown in islands off Australia, but that is a York strain of organism. Okay, the less glamorous part of this is what I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about now. So I trained as a cancer biologist, but that was far, far too glamorous for me. And so I took a massive pivot and started working in sewage sludge. It's lucky this is post-lunch, otherwise there would have been a lot of food left. Clearly, that's a really big issue at the moment with the water companies dumping stuff into the rivers that we would rather they weren't doing. And there's a lot of opportunities to manage that waste. At the moment, all of the sewage sludge in the UK goes through a process called anaerobic digestion. That is a bio-based process using a complicated community of microorganisms. And my group is really interested in how you make that process better. How do we recover those resources from waste? Not just sewage, any kind of waste, so that we can improve the quality of wastewater treatment, so we're not polluting the rivers, but also so that we're able to provide resources back to the UK that at the moment we import. So if you think about things like fertilizer, for example, nearly all of that comes from overseas. Obviously, when you have wars in the Middle East and shipping is not working, being able to provide those kinds of resources in the UK becomes increasingly important. And those are the kind of technologies that we're trying to build on and improve. One of the challenges that we've hit, so my group works a lot with the water companies in the UK, particularly Yorkshire Water. Yorkshire Water turns over 1.5 billion litres of water every day. Okay, so they're taking that much out of the rivers, they're turning it into drinking quality water, and then of course 99% of it gets flushed back into the sewer and needs to be cleaned up again before it can go back into the rivers. You know, we're doing that, or they are doing that for actually a very small amount of money. I know when you look at your water bill, it doesn't feel like it's a small amount of money, but actually they're doing it on Victorian infrastructure as well, which is part of the problem here. One of the things that has been happening in my group is working out how we can use the infrastructure that we already have, some of it is Victorian, to improve the process so that the water companies don't have to build new water treatment works, which are incredibly expensive. So most recent investment was in Leeds. It cost about £80 million to put up that wastewater treatment works. It's going to be in the ground at least 50 years, probably 100. And so we want to be able to improve the technology through biology and retrofitting rather than building new infrastructure. One of the issues we face at the moment is we can do stuff in the lab at this kind of scale, but we need to be able to do it in the real world at the million-litre scale, and for some reason that I can't really determine, nobody wants to lend me a wastewater treatment works. And you can probably understand why. If we've got it wrong in the lab, and we then get it wrong in Sheffield, there's an enormous problem and reputation of everybody suffers. So what we're looking for at the moment is a way of building a national demonstrator facility at process scale that allows us to demonstrate technologies that we're developing in York, but also that would allow universities across the country to demonstrate their technologies, so that we can move from innovations in the lab through to actually deploying it in the real world. And that sounds fairly simple, but we're talking about quite a lot of money. I was in a meeting the other day where someone said, oh, look, they managed to move this technology really quickly. It's only taken them 10 years. 10 years is too long, even when you're using infrastructure that's in the ground for 100. We should be able to do this in a couple of years. But that requires investment, and it requires, tens of millions of pounds of investment in order to be able to de-risk the investment from the water companies so that they can innovate, reduce customer bills, and make the water cleaner. There's a lot of biology behind this, and there's opportunities to add to the technology. What I had not thought about before I made the questionable move from cancer to sewage is lots of things, they end up in the sewer that we don't really think about. High-level things like drugs, pharmaceuticals go into the water. At the moment, there's no regulations that requires we take those things out of the water before it goes back into the river. That also applies to personal care products, things like soap, shampoo, makeup, and it also applies to things like microplastics from laundry. All of these problems can potentially be addressed through the biology that we use to treat the water. That's relatively, again, a low-cost type of technology to deploy, and it would make a huge difference to the quality of our environment. As an aside, just before I sit down again, this kind of microbiology doesn't just apply to wastewater treatment, right? What's going on in your gut is essentially the same microbiology. What's going on in the soil is also very, very similar microbiology. So the kind of things that we're doing at the University of York are very, very far-reaching. I'm going to stop there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now for a very different industry.
Yeah, so we're going to move away from poo. Who likes ABBA? One person in the room. Thanks, Sam. Oh, did you not hear? Who likes ABBA, the band? Yeah, okay, much better. So I thought probably the place to start is CreaTech. It's not on that slide, is it? What does CreaTech mean? It's quite a controversial world across academics, industry, but so I'm going to tell you what it means to me, and this is my personal view. The innovation of technology that serves the creative industries, okay? So the reason I mentioned ABBA, have you heard of ABBA Voyage? Has anyone been to ABBA Voyage? Strongly recommend it, whether you like ABBA or not. Fabulous. So people know of it as this bespoke venue built in London, which shows twice a day, I think, this incredible show of ABBA through avatars. So ABBA went and they got motion captured and you recreated as avatars ABBA, and you can go and it's as if they're on the stage. It looks like they're actually there. It's tricks of light. It's not holograms, for those that think it is. It's not tricks of light. It's an incredible experience. The whole show has been designed impeccably, and it cost a mere tens of millions to make. But that's kind of the state of the art of technology in the creative industries at the moment. Slightly bigger scale, the Sphere in Las Vegas, which is a venue that's been designed to allow personalized experience, insane numbers of loudspeakers in a venue, cameras, tracking, that's kind of really, really special and can completely change our experience of entertainment. That's one end of the spectrum, and it's very, very expensive to implement, to design, to make, and to go and see. But actually, the creative industries are not built on these huge, very expensive infrastructures. They're built, especially in the UK, on SMEs and independent creatives. So we've got quite a unique industry in the creative industries. But as technology, innovation, scales, becomes more and more expensive, these SMEs and creatives don't have access to that technology. They can't afford to innovate with it because they don't have the millions of pounds they need to access that motion capture technology, virtual production technologies. And that's where we come in, and that's where York has already set a huge track record of influencing innovation in technology. So I mentioned that I'm co-director of CoStar Live Lab. That stands for Convergent Screen Technologies and Performance in Real Time, and I did not come up with that acronym. Also, the P does a lot of heavy lifting, and it's not there. Performance, okay? So I run CoStar Live Lab. It's the largest single investment that the Arts and Humanities Research Council has ever made, and it's an infrastructure investment. £76 million to develop this network of infrastructure across the UK to stimulate the creative economy. So creative industries is the fastest growing part of the UK economy, and yet it's hugely driven by those huge projects that I just mentioned, those types of projects. So in order to stimulate that economy, we've had this investment to build innovation labs that serve the creative industries, those SMEs. Our lab, Live Lab, is actually based in West Yorkshire, so don't throw me out, just hear me out. So we're based in the centre of Production Park, which is the largest campus of industry dedicated to live performance in Europe. It's where your global artists like Beyonce, Coldplay, they turn up, they decide what they want their tour to look like, they design it, they build it, and they rehearse it there on Production Park. They then load it into trucks, tens of trucks, and they go off on their tours. Now, that's really important because what the AHRC, the Arts and Humanities Research Council, did when they invested this money was they said, we want to change the way that universities work with industry, especially in the creative industries. We've built a fabulous track record of businesses coming to us, and knowledge transfer, of supporting businesses in their growth. But now we want to flip that model on its head, and we want universities to be embedded in the industry. So the University of York leads this project that's based in Production Park. And our purpose is to drive that creative economy by lowering the access barrier for companies to come and innovate with us. The reason that York does this so well is because we set out on that journey and saw the potential for technological innovation in the creative industries early. So my colleague, Professor Damien Murphy, runs XR Stories, which is based in the Guildhall, our own research and development lab in the Guildhall. He was a recipient of one of the first clusters programmes, which is when the Arts and Humanities Research Council realised they needed to commit to the relationship between universities, robust R&D and industry in the creative sector, which hadn't really been done before. We were recipients of that funding, and Damien, along with his team, built the XR Stories Lab, which was hugely successful in showing regional growth for the creative industries. Lots and lots of case studies and success stories, generating, for instance, 6.6 million in additional revenue for the companies that they've worked with in the Yorkshire region. So it's because of that that we were successful in getting the CoStar funding. And what that allows us to do, we have built our R&D lab in Wakefield at CoStar. Companies are coming through this ecosystem around the creative industries, and they can do R&D for the first time. They're not just on a hamster wheel of putting productions through the world. They can think big, and they can think about what does the next thing look like in terms of the state of the art. And we can support them in that, not just through the infrastructure we've built in Wakefield, but through our mirrored provision at York, which has been carefully designed to be dynamic and ever-changing to the needs of industry, but also to tap into the expertise across the university that's essential for the creative industries. We aren't a single topic. The fact that we sit across different faculties at the university is really important. And one last point about why York is so special for the creative industries, and it's not just about technology, is for CreaTech to succeed and to really stimulate the creative economy, we have to have the creative craft behind it. And York, both in terms of the University of York and York St John, are stimulating that craft by committing to the arts and the humanities that feed in to that technological innovation. Because the creative industries, there's no point in technological innovation in and of itself. It has to serve a creative need. And that may not be the next ABBA voyage. It may be, how do you enable more audiences to see a production at the Royal Shakespeare Company? So it's not always about the technology being at the forefront. It's about embedding it into our industry.
Thank you.
Hello. As I said, I'm Edward, and I'm here on behalf of York Central. But I'm going to talk about a few other things that have led me to get involved in York Central, because there's no good reason for York Central to be part of a conversation on the scale of the adventure and journeys and change that folk you've just heard from are going to drive if it is just a place, if it's just a set of buildings. And I'm very happy to talk about the buildings. I'm very happy to talk about the planning permissions and the progress and everything. That truly, I know that that's of great interest to everybody who has a heart and a mind towards the future of York. But I want to talk about the why, really, rather than the how for the moment. Why am I at all qualified to talk about that? Well, I was the person on the end of the telephone in the Treasury when Howard Bernstein rang up and said, I want to do something different. So I was in a very lucky position that I led the teams that dealt with local growth, local authorities, regional growth and housing in the transition from the Alistair Darling Treasury to the George Osborne Treasury. Simultaneous to a conversation about the future of cities and the future of cities in the UK, we were, of course, also going through a massive change in the funding environment for lots of those places. And what those 3 or 4 years laid with me was the importance of being really well reasoned and really unreasonable. So you have to have a team when you put these places together and you put these ideas together and you make them more than just buildings, who can actually talk with a language in a lexicon which won't be familiar to most, but is absolutely fundamental to making progress with Whitehall. And so your reasoning has to be brilliant. It has to be genuinely inspirational so that you can then leap into the, I'm going to be unreasonable now and ask for more than anywhere else. I'm going to ask for more freedom. I'm going to ask for more coherence. I'm going to ask for barriers to be broken down between siloed, ring-fenced pots of money, and instead for it to be pooled in a place so that I can make decisions which are genuinely based upon the needs of that economy, of that society, of the cultural heritage and of the future innovation of this city and the people who live there. And that was the genius of Manchester from a Treasury perspective. It was to bring a really reasoned set of arguments and then be wholly unreasonable about how quickly you wanted action and how much you wanted change. From that piece of work, which being on my end of the argument was a fantastic, an eye-opening experience, I was lucky enough to then go and lead the local enterprise partnership for the North East. So whilst I was simultaneously helping London and Manchester and 1 or 2 other cities, Glasgow, through our devolved colleagues as well, to have a conversation, a different type of conversation about place, we were also getting rid of the regional development agencies. Now, lots of arguments as to why that was either a good thing or a bad thing. It was done with a stroke of a pen outside of a spending review process, so outside of normal governance. And it became a motivation for change so that we would have conversations which were either local or national. And this regional thing was taken away. The R word was literally taken away from health and policing and economy. It was just removed. Primarily because, as a statistical unit, regions are imported from the European Union. And it was part of a conversation about whether the UK within the EU. But put aside Eric Pickles and all of that for a moment, it gave me the opportunity to go back to the Northeast. I was brought up on Teesside, to go back to the Northeast and start getting involved in the actual day-to-day. I didn't have a Jim O'Neill, so I imported Andrew Adonis to do the independent economic review for the Northeast. And Andrew was uniquely positioned because I'd been sat with people like Oliver Letwin and Michael Gove and Michael Heseltine around tables in the Cabinet Office and the Treasury talking about regions and places, and the door would open and Andrew Adonis would be invited in. And he would just walk in there and say, "Oh, hi, Andrew, come and sit down." And so he was unique, as far as I could tell, as a Labour politician with a background in transport and education who could come and talk about place with the people who were making decisions in that coalition government. And so I asked him to come and help me for a couple of years to talk about the Northeast and create a strategy and a set of directional trends for the Northeast economy, but also the Northeast politically. And out of that came a combined authority and I hope a greater future for the Northeast than if we had not done that piece of work. I stepped away after a couple of years because someone said, start a bank. And so, which was really, and it's still going, it's doing fine. It's based in Newcastle, employs 600 people. It's a lending bank. So it doesn't ping you a notification every time you buy a cup of coffee. It's the bank that actually lending to businesses, helping people own their own homes. We're the second biggest lender to the first-time buyer market in the UK. So we think we're a societal good in that respect. But I'd been talking about this in Treasury, I'd been talking about this as and then for me, this was an experiment in regional policy. Could I start the first digital bank, first biometric bank, first app-based bank in the country, and then in Durham, and we've recently moved to Newcastle. So we're still going. A few years later, I began to step away and do a few other things and go back into starting more businesses through the route of venture capital and getting more involved in university commercialization. And it's all of that which led me to someone tapping me on the shoulder 2.5 years ago and saying, come and bid for to be the partner to develop out York Central. Because York, to my mind, has got, and we heard a lot of this morning, has got every single ingredient it possibly needs to be in a completely different place in terms of its prominence and its name in the northern, let alone the UK, dialogue about the economy. I'm going to just step behind my colleagues and just ask you to imagine, however, we go back to that PwC report that John, who was sat here, talked about. Yeah? And I want to split this screen into 4. So we've got on here, GVA. So that's that thing, gross value added, which is an output measure of how much we each contribute per head to the economy. So this is GVA growth on this side here. And on this side here, there's goodness as PwC measured. Okay? So in this bottom corner, you've got not very good and not really growing. Don't want to be here. This is growing, but really isn't very good in measures of society or economy as PwC weighted, which gives York an amazing position because York was, as John said, the very best on this metric here. Okay? But, here's the but. And this goes to the point about business formation rates. It goes to the point about have we got in York the places to grow businesses. York sits in GVA terms on a par with where? Shout me some names you think that are actually the same as York in terms of GVA growth? Wales? Okay. Birmingham? No, no chance. Hull? Yes. Hull, Lincoln, Middlesbrough. That's where you are? So is that where you want to be? No. Absolutely not. You are in this bottom right quadrant. Great place to live. High Street's fantastic, safe, inclusive. Skills levels are very high, although I question what you're all using them for. But down here is not where you want to be. Okay? It leaves you vulnerable, okay, to having to ask other people to determine what your future is. Yeah? York Central, to me at least, and the reason I'm involved in it, it's an opportunity to take you from that quadrant to this quadrant, which is where Bristol and Edinburgh and Oxford are. Okay? York Central is an opportunity to create in York, for the first time, a genuine central business district. It sits, of course, next to the railway station. It has a cultural anchor in the Railway Museum. It now has a government hub promised for 2,500 civil servants, bigger than the Darlington campus, yeah, to come together in the centre of York. Yeah? It has acres of land for green space, for some brilliant housing. We've employed the best architects we could possibly find for the social housing elements. Howard Tompkins are just brilliant. Brilliant architects. Yeah. But most importantly for me, it's an opportunity for about 1.5 million square feet of commercial space. Yeah. It sits, as I said, next to that railway station. It sits right on the top of 3 or 4 terabytes of dark fibre. And it's got enough power for there to be no restriction on what we do on that site. It is an amazing opportunity to fuel all of these sectors in the centre of your city. Yes, brilliantly connected to Leeds, and yes, brilliantly connected to London, but most importantly, for this city and the partners and the people that will drive it. That's why I'm involved in York Central, and I hope you'll get behind it. Thank you.
Right, so we have roughly half and half time for us to have a little bit of a discussion and then open up to the floor for questions. So get those questions forming. If this morning's anything to go by, there will be no shortage of questions, which is great. Okay, so I want to come back perhaps to something that was said this morning. And whilst Edward perhaps touched on it, I think we could explore a bit more, which is what we'd say to those 16-year-olds about what's in it for them, for the future, particularly in terms of interesting jobs and skills, but anything else as well. So what's in it for our youngsters?
May I go
yes,
first?
Please do.
So in terms of rail, there are lots of things. I think rail in York is probably, it's historic, but it's sort of unseen, the really good stuff that's going on. Last week I spoke to one of the train operating companies, Northern, and they talked about how the College of York was really important to them in terms of bringing in new technicians, new engineers into their business. So there's real things happening right now. York Central is an opportunity for rail innovation to have a home, for the rail innovation cluster, the community, to have a home where 16-year-olds can look at working within that building and bring that building to life. And the fact that the Rail Innovation Cluster already exists, is already mobilised, is really exciting because relationships are happening. In rail, it's really important to have the right relationships and to know what's going on. And I think that's an exciting opportunity. And you can be anything from a marketeer to, I don't know, the MD of a business, to a technician or someone that works on the infrastructure or someone that works on a train. So there's loads of opportunities, lots of interesting paths. And the university work with lots of organisations, big and small in rail, to actually bring, to do PhDs, to bring new engineers into the sector. So it is a really exciting thing. I think in rail we're not very good at sharing that, but we are getting better about going out into schools and making sure that's clear. So if you have any budding 16-year-olds at home wondering what they're going to do, there's lots of opportunities in rail, and they are happening in York.
Brilliant, thank you. James?
I mean, there's so many things in bio that are opportunities. Obviously, we've talked about health and how that's going to change. The population's aging more and more. I think our young people are very aware of their environments and how they want to contribute to that and preserve them or remove the pollution, and there are a lot of bio opportunities there. Energy is changing, and again, one of the big things that we recover from waste is energy at the moment, and fossil fuel replacements are really important. Actually, the only way that we get carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere at any kind of scale is through biological processes. And so understanding that, making the most of that, turning that into useful materials is going to be bio-based in the future. It's starting to be now. And part of that is all around education and encouraging people to think that way, but also encouraging them to think as entrepreneurs. And I think that's where this idea of having an infrastructure where we're encouraging particularly our young people and our undergraduates to think about how they really apply what they do in small businesses that can scale is going to be really, really important. Having the space to do that is critical. So my department has got about 80 academics in it. At the moment, we have about 10 spin-outs. One of those is a PhD student, who was in the department, who is running a business and doing cancer diagnostics through breath samples. So really, really innovative. Lots to go at in biology.
So your answer is go study biology, is it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. There may other subjects on offer. Physics. Helena.
Yeah, I was thinking about the 16-year-olds, but I was thinking more about their parents, actually. You mentioned, James, tell your kids to study biology. I think creative industries is in a really exciting place at the moment when we look at, for the first time, we're up there as industrial strategy, like creative industries, we're there. And yet, if I said to parents in the room, encourage your kid to go and study music, theatre, one of the fundamental crafts of the creative industries, you'd probably still say, I think I'll probably get them to go and do STEM. Because they're going to have a career, they've got a chance of a job. And I think CreaTech is this incredible opportunity because it only survives if all of those pillars exist and that we support them in education, but that actually you don't have to be siloed. There are so many jobs and so many different disciplines that support CreaTech and innovation, and it can't work without them. So it may be that you go and study engineering and you do comms. And do you know what we need desperately is for 6G to speed up. We need it to happen now. You talked about fibre and connectivity at York Central. If the one thing I would tell you to invest in for the things that we're trying to innovate at CoStar Live Lab, for instance, trying to save grassroots music venues, what do I want them to have? Really good connectivity. We need that. So you don't have to decide. So as a 16-year-old, creative industries are hugely exciting and inspiring, but you know what? It's okay to study the music and you could still end up supporting the comms side of it. Or you could go and do your engineering degree and come back into the creative industries and apply it in ways that mean that you're supporting, Lady Gaga on how she's going to ride a massive unicorn across an arena while she's singing and spinning around. There's so many different disciplines that are involved in it. And so it's about opportunity and not being scared of taking what often parents do perceive as a risk. Like the opportunities are there. And if we don't invest, someone mentioned earlier, we're talking about the investment in early years. That's so important, and we've lost over a decade of music education, for instance, in schools because it's stopped being invested in, and we are seeing that in the pipeline of talent. It's disappearing. So that investment in education across arts, humanities, and STEM must continue in education for the pipeline to go through. But the opportunities are there, and don't be scared. Just because the word creative is in it doesn't mean you can't get a job.
Great, thank you. Edward.
This is a really difficult one. I I mentioned I've got the joy, and it is a joy, of I chair the Audit and Risk Committee for the Treasury, so most of the time I'm looking at numbers, which isn't really where I want to be. I'm actually a bioscientist by background. Sorry. I'm a creative biologist. Yeah. So, but the other day, I was in a conversation with Chancellor and a bunch of her advisors about labour markets and AI. And a few nights before, I'd been judging a university spin-out competition amongst a bunch of undergrads and postgrads at Durham. I do hail from Durham, and clearly the best cathedral. I mean, come on. Anyway, my point to Chancellor was that at the moment, every boardroom around the world, is currently looking for ways to maximise productivity and profitability through the adoption of AI in its various guises. Whether that's to supercharge their processing power, to substitute out one form of technology for another, one form of capital for another. I mean, it was that dreadful man describing us all as low-value human capital the other day. But what they are only just waking up to is the massive challenge that AI represents to their revenue models. So I would say to every child out there that AI is actually the toolkit for you to create whatever you want. And based on what I saw from those undergrads and postgrads at Durham the other night, they created in 3 hours of a sprint more than we created in many of businesses I've been involved with in the first year of our work together. And it wasn't just stubbed out, here's a pretend look-see of an app. No, this was a fully integrated, operating minimum viable product on an iPhone, working in front of you and telling you a story about how they could do something which would be totally, totally transformational. And whether it was in the creative industries or the physical industries or the bio industries, it didn't matter. Yeah, they were changing the world in 3 or 4 hours. And the revenue models of anybody who's in the professional services companies, who are in banks, who are in anything that involves technological transformation of words and numbers into ideas and product, is going to go through such a revolution. The 16-year-old now should just be spending their time working out how to use education and technology and information to create whatever they damn well want. Because truly, there is all the world in front of them. It's a massive transformation in a mindset. But there'll be a generation of companies that'll come out and absolutely wipe the floor with all of us who think that we've got a revenue model that's stable at the moment. It's going to change very rapidly. And that's where I put I've got a 17 and 19-year-old. That's where they need to put their time.
And that's why those of us who work in universities enjoy our jobs so much, because we're surrounded by the innovation of youth. It's absolutely in their hands. I think we haven't got a lot of time, so I'm only going to ask you one more question, because I want to give plenty of time for our audience to ask you questions. So I can see that Lord Jim O'Neill is still over there, and Tom Reardon's joining us later. What's the one takeaway you'd like them to go away with about your sector or the thing, or York Central, about York? What's that message you want to, that confident message about what we've been talking about, growth for the region and York and North Yorkshire? What's the single takeaway?
Okay. So rail, for every pound that you invest in it, you end up with £2.5 of wider economic benefit. And that's based on a piece of research done by Oxford. I can't remember who it was by, but anyway, it's based on some research. But it's an industry that enables economic growth, and it's an industry, like I said earlier, connects people. It's an industry about people, and the innovation is part of that mix, and delivering passengers and goods quickly, more efficiently, in a greener way is happening. And I think York has got an important role to play in that. So it's a good investment choice because it makes a difference for everybody in the UK.
Okay, thank you. James?
I think it's the same. Investment for scale up. Again, it's really interesting that the government is saying it's putting money particularly into areas that it thinks we've innovated in, but we haven't invested and scaled. And that's where we are. We need the investment in scale up so that we can actually take things to market and make money, which is that whole GVA thing, being able to generate more income in the region. For us, we need quite a lot of money invested in that space.
Okay, scale up. Helena?
I'm really glad they both went first. I want to build on that. So exactly what they both just said. But I think I want to build on the fact I mentioned that my lab is in West Yorkshire, and I want to agree with what was said earlier about, the Northern Powerhouse and the fact that York isn't Manchester, right? We work so closely across the White Rose combined authorities in terms of creative industries, in terms of building our infrastructure that's complementary. York has something that they don't have, and they understand that, and that's why they work with us. And so I think the narrative earlier around the importance of those big cities and the Northern Corridor and the Northern Powerhouse, I don't disagree with it at all, but the sense that York will then benefit by osmosis is not what we're experiencing. Okay, what we're experiencing is York is offering something entirely unique that they can't offer back, certainly in terms of the creative industries. I haven't got time now to go into it, but we're sort of the centre of a Venn diagram around all the special things that make the creative industries so important to the economy. Tourism was mentioned earlier. So York's cultural heritage, which we invest in as a university, in terms of spin-outs, in terms of our courses. So we've got that cultural heritage, which we absolutely maximise, but we then have that CreaTech, the innovation and the excitement around innovation. We haven't quite got there yet with the scaling, and that's where we need to be, and we need to not be scared of risk-taking because we don't have the scale of those big cities. But we have something to offer, and they recognise that. There is a two-way process. It's not osmosis one way.
Thank you. Last word from you before we open it up.
Be afraid, be very afraid, is what I would believe. I'm going back to the chart. Yeah, so we've got the 4 quad, 2 by 2. Manchester's sort of here, right? York is somewhere here, okay? It has all the ingredients for brilliance, okay? But it has had 2 things where it has not prospered in the last 15 years. One, they've both been referred to all the way through today. One is that it's the only northern city where the physical amount of commercial space has gone down over the last 15 years. Yep. It's all been converted into student property. Yep. Chance to change that right now. Okay? So it's lost nearly 600,000 square feet of commercial space. Yep. 2, the business birth rate is too low. Yeah. But our friend from NatWest and the university colleagues that you heard from today and the whole of the York and North Yorkshire ecosystem is going to change all of that. Yeah. We aren't going to worry about Manchester. We're going to become better than Edinburgh, right? Yeah. We have unique aspects which Manchester can't get, to your point. Yeah. It is far more difficult to move horizontally than it is to move vertically. Yeah. And we have all the latency you need and all the skills you need. We're going to go for it. We'll be up here before you know it. Be afraid, be very afraid.
Thank you. Right, over to the audience then. So as this morning, we'll take a couple of questions in one go. So gentleman in the blue shirt there first, and then one, then lady in the green, and then you at the front. Go.
Hello. I remember reading somewhere that innovations in the early 20th century, such as the refrigerator or vacuum cleaner, typically took 30 years from being invented to get to market. But by the 50s, with things like microwaves and tumble dryers, that was down to 8 years. Now, a few of the panelists have talked about things taking 10 years from concept to market. So have we plateaued in that area? Is it something we really need to reduce?
So I suspect that's a little bit sector dependent. So yeah, but interesting to get a couple of different perspectives, because I think it's maybe a different answer. Who wants to go first? Yeah, because you've been talking about
because also it's subsector dependent. So I've been talking about creative industries, that covers a lot of different subsectors. But in terms of CreaTech, particularly, it's rapid. So often what we find is that the CreaTech industries, the SMEs or medium-sized companies that we're working with, rely on trade secrets. They do rather than protect, because the innovation is so fast that if they wait around trying to get patents, then someone else will have come up with a solution sooner. So in terms of that world, it's really rapid. And then I can't not mention AI, really. Again, speed is of the essence. So in that sense, really, really, really quick.
So how about in the biosector?
So I think bio is really interesting, because on the one hand, you've got things like pharma and drug development, and that is inherently slow because you have to do so many safety trials. But there are other parts where we can go really fast. You know, when you're doing things like diagnostics, potentially you can move a lot more quickly. And certainly in the area of things like farming, you can innovate really, really fast if you can scale fast enough. And at the moment, that's the choke point for the UK, is we're not good at scaling. And some of that is physical infrastructure and some of it's investment. And that's why people go abroad, because they can get investment somewhere else. But the physical infrastructure is something we could address quickly, and then you end up with technologies that you can export to the world rather than sending out to be developed somewhere else in the world.
Rail?
Rail is known for being really slow to adopt innovation. However, I think SMEs have a lot of the key to adopting innovation, creating it. And innovation is only successful if it's commercialised. So it's not just the idea generation, because I think there's lots of ideas being generated, but it's the actually getting it to the customer, getting it out there. And I think with track and train coming together, which is already happening right now, because there's the Department for Transport operator, which is taking on 14 train operating companies across the UK and creating them as one unit, getting ready to go into Great British Railways, where Network Rail and DFTO join together. I think there's a lot more conversations happening, a lot more links, a real desire to do better. We understand we are too slow with innovation, and I think York can play a really good part in that. I think I'm an optimist, so and when I ran a company, a road rail plant company, we were really quick at innovating. We were very close to our clients. We had that collaborative spirit. We managed to fund our projects. They were only small in the main, but we managed to do that really, really successfully and learn how to get through all the gates of approval, etc., because it's a safety critical environment. So I think we're going to get faster. I think it's a really exciting time to be in rail because of track and train coming together.
Thank you. Did you want to come in on this point?
Not about that one. I want to respond more broadly to a couple of things, particularly
yeah.
Sorry, I just wanted to
go ahead, and then I'll come back
point
to
something out which is relevant to the chart. So in all great dimensions of success, it is still the case that on the index of multiple deprivation, 5 of the worst 25 in the country are in Greater Manchester, which is why it's, I assume, Ed, it's there. So in that sense, to underline what it feels, it should be a lot easier for York, given that where it is over here already. And that shouldn't be under, you know, I think I wanted to underscore that.
Yeah, we should value it.
Yeah.
Lady in the green.
Thank you. Given what we heard this morning, and it came from James this morning loud and clear, where we've got to have scale and we've got to focus, how do we use U4 to tell the story of York Central? Because I was horrified that he'd never heard of it. How do we sell York Central, not on the 3,000 homes, which will be brilliant and happen? How do we use your creativity to sell the story of York Central to become better than Cambridge?
I think that's directed at you first, Edward, is the most expert in this.
Well, thank you for the question. Better than Cambridge is a big one, but let's take one moment with Cambridge. Cambridge is sort of founded on two companies at the moment, really. If you look at what's really happening there, and on one attitudinal shift. So we're not going to move the microchip or the pharma and drug business that's in Cambridge to York. But we do have amazing strengths of our own, which we can come back to, and are very much represented by these three sectors here. The attitudinal shift in Cambridge was to simply give IP to their scholars. So this is a challenge to back to the university, I guess. Intellectual property. Sorry, I beg your pardon. Anything that any of their scholars comes up with belongs to the scholars. University takes a fat 0% of it. And as a result, they attract some of the most brilliant and entrepreneurial scholars from around the world to Cambridge. Now, they have a whole bunch of issues when scholars who have left Cambridge think that some PhD student they left behind has nicked their ideas and has commercialized it. So they spend quite a lot of time in court, yeah? But they put that cost to one side when they compare it to the value that they get from allowing their scholars to take their intellectual property, which, by the way, most of which, in the Cambridge's case, has actually been paid for by Cambridge. For most other universities in the UK, it's paid for by you and me. Yeah. Right? Doesn't belong to the university, really. Yeah? I would argue. Personal perspective, not a treasury perspective or anybody else's perspective, my perspective. Where I see that, then I see a place that really wants to go for it and has got its university into a position that says growth and high value growth is not a dirty word. High value growth is the bit that's missing from the rest of the economy. Yeah. I used to spend a lot of time looking at the Northeast economy, and I still do to some extent. And the Northeast economy had the same proud boast that actually very, very narrow bars between the fifth income decile and the 95th, where somebody on 5% of income was and 95% of income was in the Northeast. Narrow, together, inclusive. And they would also say that they were the only region in the UK that had a trade surplus, exporting more than it were importing. The problem with that is that they're only exporting more than they're importing because there's no demand in the economy. Right? And they've got this incredibly narrow income distribution because there's a top end that's missing. It's not that the bottom end is stronger. It's not that people on fifth income percentile are actually any wealthier than the fifth income percentile anywhere else in the country. That's not the case. No, there's a whole bunch of wealth missing. Right? So I don't think that inclusive growth should be simply about constraining ambition and outcome and achievement. Yeah, I think it has to be about opening opportunity for everybody and then making sure that your education system takes everybody who can and wants to and is able to with it.
So any more perspectives on how we sell York Central?
So,
I noticed Joan handed you.
and I'll read that in a minute. But, but I was thinking about this this morning when we were talking about it. Cambridge is really interesting, right? Because in a lot of ways it's quite similar to York in terms of size and all that kind of thing, but it's full. They're having to build a new city in order to be able to expand. And that includes wastewater treatment works. It's like the first one that has been seriously invested in like 30 or 40 years. So, a lot of these places are reaching capacity. They're doing brilliantly, but York is not at capacity at the moment, and we are just as good. And the opportunities are huge. So bioeconomy in Europe or across the globe is projected at $30 trillion, right? And 55% of that activity is in the north of the country, particularly around the northeast and Yorkshire. So there's huge capacity here. Being able to bring people into York to do that is really important. And again, that feeds back into some of what was being said today. At the moment, York is horribly expensive to live in. I've got people in my group moving further and further out of York, but the advantage we have is that the transport is pretty good to get people back in. But we absolutely can act as a magnet for people coming from Leeds and Darlington and Hull and everywhere else, because the technologies sit in this city, even though we're a small city, and we have that opportunity to grow much faster than anywhere else.
So it's used this space well, but I think the question was also about how we get that message out, which I think we're really quickly, I want to get this last question, go on. Yeah.
So in Rail, we're quite good now at telling our stories to each other within our sector. So my ask is really of everyone in this audience is take away the things you've heard about the exciting things that are happening in York and share them with your colleagues, share them with your family, your friends, because that's part of the way that we're getting the news out there. In Rail, some of the good news stories doesn't hit the national headlines because it isn't the negative, my train was late, leaves on the line. So, you know, it's up to everybody to share the brilliant stuff that's happening, I think.
We're storytellers.
Yes, I was hoping you'd say that.
It's what we do, and I think we should take that as a provocation that I need to take on with the combined authority, because it's not just about York Central either. So everyone in this room has chosen to come here today because you want to learn more about this. So you have a certain attitude already towards your community and this place, but actually it's the people that aren't in this room. We aren't connecting with, and we're not telling them this story. And so it's the story you're telling about GVA. No one wants to sit and have a TV advert about GVA. It's not, it's not worth investigating. Okay, sorry. So in Darlington, they may like that, but so I think we need to do a piece of work there, and it's not just York Central. It's about what York Central does for society and on the ground to everybody, not just the people in this room. Yeah. So I will take that as a personal action, and you can hold me to asking what I've done about it.
Thank you. It's so not about the buildings.
Yeah.
No, it's what.
It's so not about the buildings. Yeah. But there haven't been enough buildings to enable something to happen.
It's what they will enable. So this is going to have to be the last question, I think, Adam. Yeah. Yes. Unless the panel are really quick.
Thank you. So full disclosure, I work for the University of York. I look after supporting business partnerships for research. Now, perhaps this has already been decided, but what should universities in York do, or how should they best have a presence in York Central in order to actually achieve or to interface better with the commercial entities that are there, that actually leads to economic impact, rather than just having, dare I say, a loosely defined entity with innovation and hub and cluster in the title?
I was going to have to start with you again, Edward.
Absolutely. That's a great question. Thank you so much. That was a genuine thank you. Slightly strained thank you there. Yes, look, right outside the new station entrance, which you'll face into a wonderful bit of public realm with the new Central Hall for the Rail Museum, will be the innovation hub for York, in York Central. The proper function of that building, which will be timber framed, we hope it'll be the lowest embodied carbon of any commercial building in the whole of the UK. It'll be brilliantly connected physically and digitally. It'll be powered with, we hope, some really innovative technology going onto site as well. What really, really matters about it is whether you've got IP lawyers, whether you've got the right kind of accountants, whether you've got the right kind of bankers, whether there's a network of people who go from angel through pre-seed to post-seed and Series A and beyond, who not just know it but live it. And Jim and I chaired different types of and different sizes of sort of regional VC firms. This is far bigger than Little Northstar that I chair in the Northeast. Yeah, But what we do is the pre-seed and the seed stage, and we employ scientists. Yeah, you employ someone who actually understands IP and understands the longevity of that IP to sit there day by day, week by week, and be part of the community. Go to the pub, have a serendipitous conversation next to a football pitch or in the supermarket, wherever it might be, and be engaged. So what we have to do to ensure that it works is actually create people and create revenue budgets, not just capital budgets that build stuff, but revenue budgets that pay for people and systems and processes to be built around the whole notion that only an innovation-led future takes us from bottom right to top right.
So I'm going to come to Abi for a perspective on this as well, because I know that a lot of the excitement around the cluster development of rail in York has come from the prospect of having this home in York. So I wonder if you've got a perspective on this question as well.
I think picking up on what Edward said about relationships, I'm a real believer that actually it's not what you know, it's who you know. It's really, really important to keep building that network. And I think York, the rail innovation community there, it's got academia in it. It's a triple helix. You know, it's talking to all the right people. I think as that expands, those relationships will get bigger and the innovations will happen from that. And it, you know, I think it's just being part of the conversation. And yeah, what you said really about just chance conversations making a difference. And that's, yeah, I think just keep part of that conversation.
Serendipity within a structure.
Yeah. Within a place or a network. Not totally random.
James, last word?
So with my head of department hat on, one of the issues we've always had is students would rather stay in York and work in a coffee shop, goes back to this morning, than go and get a graduate job outside of York somewhere, okay?
It's the good place to live.
Yeah, it's a great place to live. And so part of what we need in a centre like that is role models and mentors, people that are doing it so that we, again, are teaching our young people and our students, this is very achievable, people are living it, they have that kind of experience. You know, so I think having people that are already doing this accessible, it sounds like there are lots of people being invested in, 250 new companies from NatWest. Having those conversations again is really, really important to make people realise they don't need to work in a coffee shop in order to be able to stay in York.
And the co-location was a large part of what you were describing, Helena, at Production Park. Okay, we are over time, so unfortunately I think we're going to have to conclude. Thank you to our panel for showing us the oomph and for going from sewage to ABBA all in one go. And thank you for your questions and your engagement all day.